Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome to a brand new series for the BanterFlix movie review website. We are doing a little rejigging for 2022 and making some changes to the podcast, to the website, a little bit of everything. It's the same old voices though. It's all new, brand spanking new BanterFlix podcast, but it's the same old voices, dear listeners. Yeah, I'm still here. I'm still on hosting duties. But on this episode, I'm joined by my lovely deputy editor, Joe McElroy.
Good evening, everyone, with my new voice for 2022. I'm only messing. It's me. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be back in the new year, and it's lovely to see both your lovely faces again.
That's very on topic, Joe, to what we're going to be discussing in this new series with the podcast as we celebrate Belfast on film. But Joe and I can't talk about these films on our own. We have our lovely, lovely resident Disney queen, formerly known as Double O'Brien. No, it's just Brown. Hello, Victoria Brown.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, you guys. So we're going to be talking, as I've kind of said in my little rambly kind of intro, we're doing a little bit of rejigging with the podcast. So we're going to now focus on Northern Irish productions, Northern Irish features, even shorts, specifically those filmed in Belfast, about Belfast, or featuring Belfast talent. So that means, dear listeners, I get to talk at some point about 50 Shades of Grey with our Jamie, but we'll come to that point at some time. But I thought there was only one movie we could talk about to start this Belfast on-screen season, and that is Belfast itself. Kenneth Branagh's feature. It's recently been released in cinemas. It's partially based on Branagh's own life. He's talked about this being a feature that has been burning a hole in his brain and his heart for quite some time and has been itching to tell this story about his experiences of Belfast, specifically around 1969, if I'm getting that right, when he and his family eventually, through the Troubles, left the city of Belfast. Whilst I know that's venturing slightly into spoilerific territory, if you know Kenneth Branagh, you know that story. We will come back to our thoughts on the film in the second part of this pod, but I think to really rejig things round, I think for the first part, we will be talking a little bit about the production of the film and sharing kind of what information, and we have one half of the Sleuth sisters here, so it'll be interesting to see what he's dug up about the production of Belfast. And Victoria Brown loves her kind of grisly murder stuff as well, so it'll be interesting to see what she brought up. I just kind of went for fluffy fun stuff because, hey, I'm a Kenneth Branagh fan, and this is going to come throughout most of this podcast. But before we get into part one, I think we will kick things off by playing a clip of the trailer for Kenneth Branagh's film.
You're running around here like the man in the big picture, not paying your taxes and spending all our money on horses.
It's the building trade. I told you it doesn't work the normal way. I told you I had it covered.
I was the one who had it covered.
No, you had to spend 3 years of back tax.
To keep you out of bloody jail. We're drowning in debt.
We're near done with the back tax. £10 a month for 3 bloody years. This is the time to think about making a new start.
I know nothing else but Belfast.
Exactly. There's a whole world out there. We can give these boys a better chance than we ever had. There's Commonwealth countries needing tradesmen. The government will give you assisted passage. We can get the whole family to the other side of the world for £10. We're living in a civil war. And I'm not here to protect my family.
So that's a clip of Belfast. As I said in my little rambly introduction, the film has just been released in cinemas now. Joe, Victoria, let's start. We'll have a little of a deep dive into talking about the production. Who wants to go first? I'll start with you, Victoria. What have you dug up about the production of Belfast? Tell us a little bit about it.
I was actually able to find quite a lot. So anyone that knows about Kenneth Branagh knows that this is a semi-autobiographical film of his experience as a kid growing up in Belfast. Obviously, he feels very connected to his roots here. He's said for years and years that he wanted to do. Wow. He said for years and years that he's wanted to do a story about Belfast, but he could never find the right time or the right tone, and it just happened that in lockdown it all came together. I believe half of it was filmed in Belfast during part 1 of lockdown, and half of it was filmed in London. Could be getting those two mixed up, but I know they were filmed in like 2 bits. Yeah, I think Branagh did a really good job of making sure everything was very authentic looking, which was very nice. Like, even in the cinema, you can hear like older residents going, "Oh, I know that wee road. I remember that wee shop." Like, there's wee things he does that makes it.
Yeah, but those are just
authentic.
mentals in cinema, Brian. Let's be honest. I mean, those are just people who kind of like watch Scream and probably go, "You remember when that happened in Woodsboro? Remember that happened here?" You're like, "All right, okay, come on, back to the old people's home. Away you go." It's funny you mentioned about the sound and kind of visuals. I mean, I think it was a lot of the kind of the Belfast itself, the kind of 1969 setting. So as we said, it's set in 1969, kind of the onset of the Troubles. Troubles very much in the backdrop of this film, and it's intentionally in the backdrop of the film. It's not a deep dive into trying to explore what happened in Belfast. It's very much looking through that. The catalyst of those events and in and around being in that environment from a 9-year-old boy. We have our little buddy played by Jude Hill, who is rather fantastic, but we will save our thoughts in the film until part 2. But that's very much kind of, I think people coming into this expecting it to be a deep dive into the onset of the Troubles, I think will be left disappointed. And I have heard and I've read piffy reviews where it's been criticised for not trying to tackle the Troubles. But one thing, and I know I've jumped in, Brian, to what you were saying, but the sound design is something I was very impressed with. And I know I get a sense before we started this recording that Joe has already, I don't think he's mentioned it in this recording, but before we started, we were talking about Roma. And you look at the sound design of a film like Roma, and it is just pitch perfect. It's built for cinema. Okay, Belfast isn't on that level, but I was kind of listening, he talked about how he recorded the sounds of churches that were near this North Belfast setting, kind of trying to get as much authentic audio as he could, because they were kind of left that virtue, as you've mentioned, Victoria, that we had a COVID lockdown. There wasn't as many planes in the sky. It was a lot quieter. They were able to do it. But I think a lot of the kind of external shots, because the film's bookended by contemporary Belfast, and then it's kind of in colour, and then it goes back. And I don't know if it's just Northern Ireland or Northern Irish viewers that have an introduction by Kenneth Branagh, or if it's just universally being introduced by Kenneth Branagh. I'm not certain about that. I think it's probably universal. But I think a lot of the kind of the sets were in London, kind of Surrey area. And I think a lot of the external shots, the wide shots of the landscape of Belfast, was all kind of shot kind of during the lockdown. That's Belfast centric. There is times, and I think we're always going to do that, when you look at a film and you go, that's not Belfast. That's not Belfast. I think it's when they go on a day trip. I forget where it is they go in the family. They go to a day trip, and it's like, that's not Northern. It's a small hill I'm prepared to die on. But then we've had this problem with other films I'm sure we will talk about throughout this series. Films like 71, which weren't filmed in Belfast, because the simple answer is Belfast now doesn't look like Belfast of 1969. But that's just the way of development and the way the things have happened. Joe, where are you going to weigh in now? What tidbits of interesting info have you managed to dig up for our listeners about Belfast?
Well, sort of just going off on the setting again, they actually built the street at the edge of an airport. I think it was Farnborough? I had it written down. Yeah, sorry there. Farnborough airport, which is just outside London. They basically recreated that street. So, it is true what you're saying. You're going, it's not Belfast. But again, you get that sense as well whenever, that day trip, you're like, why not just go to Ormo Park or something? Just throw that in. But that's a minor quibble. That's something we'll get into later. But in the film in general, like Victoria was saying, it was just sort of began when I think it was July 2020. Branagh announced he was going to make it because lockdown sort of when it first kicked in around March time, it sort of forced him to contemplate his own childhood and his where he'd come from and stuff like that, which is why he was like, what, it's like a now or never sort of moment where I'm going to write this and I'm going to wait for a break in lockdown and shoot it. And sure enough, he did. It took him, I think, according to an interview I was reading, I think it was in a Hollywood Reporter, 6 weeks pre-production and 6 weeks shoot. So he managed to fit it all in around September of 2020, whenever there was that slight break in lockdown whereby, productions were able to start up again and so on and so forth. And, it is impressive that he managed to, manage that feat with all the difficulties that comes with that. And another thing, during, between takes, what would normally happen was, the cast and that would play football in amongst themselves. And just to sort of build, chemistry between themselves and so on and so forth. But what Branagh would have done, whilst they played football, and then I think Judi Dench would do a few quizzes with some of the children in the cast as well. He would have recorded them, in secret, just to get little moments and little tidbits. And you kind of get that in the film as well. It just adds to the more realism and of the whole moment, and the chemistry between the different characters, even when they technically weren't in character. So it's just little things that really helped create a sense of community in the cast.
Yeah, you definitely get that throughout the film, and you can see that on set. I think touching on the COVID, I think a large part again of why they filmed in England as opposed to over here was also because you have the likes of Judi Dench. And kind of it's harder to kind of, I think I either read or listened to an interview with Branagh when he talked about the fact that, of course, with casts with COVID they have to do social bubbles, and it was just easier for them to do that in England with the likes of Judi Dench than it would have been to bring them over here and having to keep them in hotels and stuff. So you get a sense of opportunism. As Joe's alluded to there, the fact that the pandemic brought everything to a standstill, it allowed Branagh that time to kind of reflect. And as I mentioned earlier on, this story that he's just felt for a long time has been burning a hole in his head and his heart, which I thought was a lovely turn of phrase. And I think actually I was listening to 5 Live, and I think it's actually a conversation he had with Simon Mayo, because Simon Mayo and him had this talk about writing books. And that's where Mayo apparently coined that phrase, and that's where that came. That was kind of the catalyst for that. But the thing that I was kind of, when I was doing a bit of research for this, and I don't think it was ever going to be an outright musical, and I think we've mentioned COVID. I think we'll maybe keep the Van Morrison stuff to part 2, where we're talking about reviews, but I think there's a sense that, in a weird way, and I know I'm venturing into kind of review territory. I mean, I grew up, Van Morrison was a big part of my childhood, big part of my life, and I think for a lot of people, because my late father, whether it was a claim that was true or not, he claimed to knock about with Van when they were younger, when they went to school in round Orangefield, and talked about, I don't think they were friends, but they knew each other, as you do, a bit like we see Friends with Buddy here. And I think in more recently with COVID pandemic, and kind of Van Morrison has become more famous for his protest songs and his protests against social distancing, and I don't think Robin Swan will be getting a Christmas card from Van Morrison anytime soon. But what I liked, and I know this is going into review territory, those songs, it reminded me of just how much I love Van Morrison's music, and as much as he seems to be he is a grumpy arsehole, I mean, pardon my language, but he is. I think he wouldn't even have any obligation with that. He is a grumpy bastard, but just kind of how venturing into RC territory he has ventured with the COVID pandemic. And let's not kind of go down and venture into Joe Rogan podcast material about COVID and all that kind of stuff, but the problematic issues with Van Morrison now, not that I kind of forgotten about them, but I think it reminded me a lot of the music and the power of his music, and it's a big part of anyone growing from Belfast. We think of Van Morrison, we think of Belfast, But as I kind of segued in typical Jim McLean style into that little rant about Van Morrison, I was interested that Kenneth Branagh was going to have music. I don't think he was ever going to do an original score. I think it's a Patrick Doyle. I can't remember the name of the composer he normally works with. He's worked with a lot of Shakespearean titles. He worked on Thor. He worked even on Jack Ryan, and I'm not sure if he scored. I think he did for the Death in the Nile and what's the other one? The
Murder in the Orient Express.
The Death in the Nile and Murder in the Orient Express. I think he's been the composer on that. But so it's interesting that he's working with Van on this. But he was going to do a lot more musical sequences. Like, I think he talked about having certain sequences, like dreamlike sequences, that were going to be more musical numbers. And I think it works for the better of the film. Don't want to go into too much into that, but I think it works for the better that those are left out. There is, it's in the trailers. There is a lovely sequence at the end of this film with Jamie Dornan and Caitríona Balfe, if I'm getting that right, who I didn't realise was from Monaghan. I didn't realise that until I kind of did a deep dive down, because I've seen her in Outlander and never really picked up kind of any Irish twang, but when you hear her just being interviewed, it's unmistakable that she's pretty much, she's a Monaghan girl, but less said about that, the better. So, yeah, that was my little... It's not so much as my interesting tidbit of information I found about the production for this, but it's more a case of you've touched on, Victoria and Joe, you've all touched on things that I've dug up in my research about this. Anything else you want to kind of touch upon? Anything else you want to talk about? Because I know, we will at some point have to talk about Buddy. Not Buddy the Elf, it's not Christmas time anymore, but little Jude Hill as Buddy, the star of this feature, which I think Kenneth Branagh said over 350 tapes they looked through, and he liked the fact that Jude Hill seemed like a small kid that was he wasn't cocky or self-assured about himself. He's actually an Irish dancer, because my wife and I were talking about this because she wanted to know why an Irish dancing class that her work where she works, my lovely wife, she wanted to know why were they congratulating someone from Belfast, and I think I read an interview somewhere that it was like, oh, he's an Irish dancer, and I do want to come back to his physicality in the review section. But Kenneth Branagh noted about how he was someone who was quite happy to listen, and that comes back to what Joe was talking about, those shots where you can see him, because I think back, it's only because I've watched it, like the Harry Potter reunion. When you look back at the early Harry Potter films, you can see it's like young actors are like, right, they're being very clearly told, right, this is where we want you to look, this is what we want you to do. And you get that. It's not to the later films. You get that naturalism in front of the camera, and I get a sense now. I know that may be something we'll talk about more in the review section of the pod, but I thought he was a very natural performer for such a young actor, and he hadn't acted before. He was very natural in front of the camera, and he's very much a big part of this film's charm for me. But that's that little tidbit, for me. Victoria, Joe, anything else you want to throw in at this stage before we venture into sharing our thoughts in the film?
Is the decision to film it in black and white part of the review or the production?
No, you can talk about that in the production, because you can talk about it at this stage, because it's both black and white and colour. There's really nice uses of that of that palette. I don't know, and maybe either of the two of you have done research, whether they actually filmed it in black and white or whether it's been converted into black and white. I'm not quite certain. It looks very much like it's been done in post rather than during.
From the research, I think they did film it in black and white on digital, because like you were saying about the composer Patrick Doyle, worked with Kenneth Branagh a lot. This is the same cinematographer that Branagh's worked with a lot. It's Harris Samber Lucas, whose name I probably butchered, but he worked on him with Thor, Death in the Nile, Murder in the Orient Express. But apparently they used, I'm near sure it was filmed in black and white, but they really tried to use natural light. So when you see shots that do look a bit more stylized, that's probably what it is. Like you said, there's bits that probably have been touched up in post because the technology is there, so why not? But I do think it was an interesting choice to film it in black and white, because that's one of the selling points. It was different with old films where you didn't have a choice. Branagh has made an active, conscious choice to film this in black and white. And when you look at interviews with the cinematographer, he said that for the nature of what this story is, like you said in your intro, Jim, this is not exploring the origin of the Troubles. That's not what the film is. The film is about the emotion of these small communities during the Troubles. It's the emotions of this small boy and his very specific experience. So the kind of reasoning behind the black and white was they didn't want people being distracted by color. With black and white, they said it's easier to focus on the human condition and the emotions, like on people's faces, because you're not distracted by color, which I thought was interesting because this film is about emotion. It's not about the violence, which is a weird thing to say considering it's a film about Belfast.
Yeah, it's true. And just on that note as well, I know that Branagh talked quite a lot about there's certain sequences, and I guess we'll come back to this in the review section as well, where he very much wanted to frame the shot like it was from the perspective of a 9-year-old boy. And there's times I think that works, and there's times I think it doesn't work. There's times I think it's beautiful. I'll be honest. I mean, I'm not going to let myself be Mr. Gushy McGushy just yet, but there's times I think that sequence really works, and there's other times it's a bit like some films when I think it's not quite it's a wide angle lens. It's not a fisheye lens that they're using in that, and I think at times it works and feels much more organic to the scene and organic to the whole kind of feature as an ensemble. But I think at other times it doesn't work to less effect. But that's just me. Joe, anything else you want to throw in at this stage?
Well, nothing really in the sort of visuals of it, because I suppose that will come later in the review. But just even in the production itself, I think Jamie Dornan, he said even though he was from here, he had to even adjust his accent somewhat as well. From what I was reading, he said he wanted to go for more of a middle class Belfast accent. Ciarán Hinds didn't really get into much detail in terms of his preparation of it, because from my knowledge he was born in Belfast, and when we go into the review we'll see how much prep Dame Judi Dench put into her accent, but that's for later. So yeah, it was just interesting to see that there aspect of things, and getting back to Jude Hill as Buddy, I think one of the reasons Branagh cast him as well is that he didn't have that child actor thing where his eyes would glaze over, as Branagh would say, and he would feel nervous about saying his lines. It's exactly what you were saying, Jim. There was a complete naturalism to him, and that really does shine through in the film. But other than that, there's not much else I really could find or that sort of popped up that you guys haven't already mentioned about the production itself.
I just want to say on that note about the young actor. I mean, I don't know if either of you have seen this. There's a short that friend of the show, local filmmaker Leo McGuigan, he made a short in 2018 called The Invention. If you've never seen it, it's well worth a watch. I think it's free to watch on YouTube now. But Leo cast a young actor, Luke Walford, as the leading role of young boy Frankie, and again he's very natural in front of the camera, very much similar in that same way that we sense. And I want to just give a shout out as well to Lewis McCaskey as well. He might not be given as much to do within the feature, but I think there's a real chemistry between the two brothers in this feature, and I think that really is something that makes the film work. That's venturing into review territory. So I think we've talked enough about the production for now. I think we'll play another clip of Branagh's film, and then we'll get into sharing our thoughts on the film.
Alder Grove bus going in 3 minutes. Last tickets now.
The boss has been in touch. They want me to stay on. A permanent job in England. Wanting me to move into management. It's more money. There's a house that goes with it. We get it rent-free, with a chance to own it if things go well. A wee bit bigger than what we have here. A room for each of the boys. There's a wee garden too.
Are you allowed to play football in that garden, Daddy?
Aye, son. If I say yes, there's more money straight away. We could start getting on top of that back tax now. This family's not going to get another chance like that in this town. Not now.
Here, watch out for that traffic there.
I'm watching it now, Mommy. It's okay.
So that's another clip of Belfast, and now we get to share our thoughts on the film. As you can guess throughout so much of this podcast so far, I've been quite positive. I was very impressed by the film, I've got to say. I have not been looking forward to watching it. I have been concerned for quite some time that it's going to be, what's the best way to put this? Cinematic postcard dripped in sugar that's going to slip me into a diabetic coma. And whilst it is a very sugary sweet film, it unashamedly wears its heart on its sleeve. Anyone who knows this pod and the previous guys will know I defend those films to the hilt. It's not perfect, not by any means, but it's nowhere near as bad a film as I thought Belfast was going to be, and actually it surpassed my expectations. I was moved, I sobbed a little bit, I laughed quite a bit throughout it. You know, Kenneth Branagh, we should have said this in the feel good we should have mentioned this in the production side. Kenneth Branagh always sold this as a feel-good feature. You know, it might be about Belfast, the onset of the Troubles, but he never wanted that film, as we've already alluded to, and we've already mentioned, he never wanted his film to delve into the kind of exploring the outset of the Troubles. He wanted it to be very much focused on family and character, and he wanted it to be a film that made you smile and made you laugh. And I'm just going to be honest, I mean, I think he achieved that for me, and I know there will be inevitable comparisons. Joe's already mentioned it before we started to record. We already talked about this. There is going to be comparisons with Roma. I think that is both probably fair and unfair at the same time. But it also, in a sense, reminds me, the film I thought about when I was watching it actually was something like Empire of the Sun. In that sense, when you're looking at kind of those kind of big, deep, dark subject matters, but you look at it through the eyes of a younger viewer, you look at it through the eyes of a child, and it makes it not palatable, but it makes it kind of, a 9-year-old isn't going to be concerned about what's going on with, you know, at the outset of the Troubles. He's more interested in getting to the top of his class to, you know, get to sit beside the girl of his dreams, the girl he's going to marry, and I really want Buddy to marry that girl and be good at his maths and get his homework and get everything done. That's what he's interested about, and he doesn't care that she's a Catholic, and that's, you know, that's something we will come back to. I was impressed by this film. There are flaws. We will talk about Judi Dench. I know we're going to talk about Judi Dench at some point, and that accent. But I didn't think that accent was jarring enough to take me out of the film. And I enjoyed it. It's a warm hug of a film, and maybe just right now I needed that warm hug. So, yeah, Sir Ken, it's a thumbs up from me. Joe?
I wish I could give Sir Ken a thumbs up. Maybe a half-hearted, like, good for you, Ken. I didn't like it anywhere near as much as you, Jim. I wouldn't say that I hated it now, because I think that'd be very unfair. It's just, I just don't think it was for me overall, to be honest. When you touched upon it being sort of sugary sweet and all that there, and, you know, I do see that he was trying to wear his heart on his sleeve, because it is his most personal film to date. There's no doubt about that there. That's the things that bothered me too much about it, is that it was too sort of saccharine and sweet, and at times I was like, oh, come on, like, give over. But at the same time, it was like a conflict constantly, because I had to constantly remind myself, it's a 9-year-old's perspective of these things. You know, try and keep your mind open to that. But as well as that, some of the dialogue sort of took me out of things a bit at the same time. Like, there was just an example, like the scene where Jamie Dornan's, you know, dealing with you know, the thugs and stuff like that there. It just seemed so cliched. It's like, you can punch this stuff up a bit, you know, you're better than this, you know, and for the film that you're trying to tell, it deserves more, and it just didn't reach those heights with me. The black and white, my issue with it looked too clean and too much of a sheen to it. You see, maybe that's to do with my expectation of it. I expected something maybe a little bit more grit to it, because we're going back to 1969. We're going back to, you know, just in the cusp of the Troubles. I know it's not about the Troubles, it's about this young boy and his childhood. But at the same time, it just seemed too clean and too sort of carefree. But at the same time, this stuff's happening. You know, you can't really ignore it too much. And ultimately, I was kind of like, well, it does look nice, and there are some great shots in it, but I was like, I don't know. And then the thing that really made me just sort of put me off it was the tonal shifts in it at times. Like, we go from the death of a character straight through to a musical number, essentially, with, like, Jamie Dornan singing on stage, and I was kind of going, hang on, this is total whiplash. I'm getting a bit lost here. What are you trying to do here? And ultimately, I was just disappointed by the whole thing, to be honest with you. I don't think it's fair that a lot of people are saying it's Oscar bait, because I don't think that was Branagh's intention with the film. He just wanted to make a nice personal story. I think that's more to do with the studios pushing it for Oscars and awards and that there, because even Branagh himself was like, I never dreamed in a million years this would have been, you know, an awards contender, which is what it is at the minute. But for me, I just felt it was a disappointment more than anything, to be honest.
Okay, you see, I just went in, because I went in with kind of worried, hesitant expectation. That's probably the best way to put it, because I was so hesitant about the film that I was so worried, and I was worried about it being a cookie cutter of a movie. I know it is a cookie cutter of a movie, but I think it could have been much more sugary sweet. Like, I was thinking about this when I was watching, and I know I'm getting in the way of kind of Victoria sharing her thoughts, but I was thinking about, I mean, this is the type of film I wish that Cinemagic did. This is the type of film, a festival like Cinemagic, who do such great things for young people in cinema and getting them engaged with cinema and world cinema. And they make films like A Christmas Star, which are just kind of diabetes on screen. That's literally what they are, and they are so sugary sweet. And the mantra behind them is, wouldn't it be great if we all just got along? And it's so jarringly in that front. I mean, this is the film I wish Cinemagic were making, and I think it's great that Sir Kenneth, I don't think we've addressed him as Sir Kenneth throughout this pod. I think he's done something. Yes, it's very personal to him. Yes, it indulges itself at time. And yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, there are some jarring tonal shifts. I will come back, because I know he's addressed that, Joe, when he was being interviewed. He kind of talked about, he wanted that sequence to be the idea of the wake process, where you pay your respects to someone for I think 5-6 days when you wake the body, and then after the funeral everyone goes to the pub and they just are kind of enjoy life and have renewed kind of gusto for life. I love that. I'm going to be honest, I love that sequence, because we're going to come back to Jude Hill just for one sequence in it, and we have Jamie, sexy Jamie, dancing and singing. I don't think he's actually singing. I think it's just dubbed, and it's the original performance. Sorry, apologies, listeners, for me burping again. Very professional, but I don't think it's him. I think he's just being dubbed over. I think it's the original song, and he's just lip syncing to it. But there's a sequence between him and Caitríona Balfe, and then it just cuts. I just see two people in love. And I want to come back to this as well. Two people just in love, and then it cuts, and it's just Buddy, and he's watching his two parents just in love with each other, and it just put a smile on my face. And it's just that film that you're not worried. People aren't worried about whether they're living next door to a Protestant or a Catholic. They're worried about the fucking rent man coming down. And there's just a sequence involving the rent man. It's been done to death in films before, films and TV, but it made me laugh out loud in the cinema. But that's just me. Brian, where are you going to weigh in? Are you going to go on the light side, or are you going to go with Grumpy Joe?
Honestly, I'm leaning more towards Grumpy Joe.
Oh, you're a bad person, Victoria.
I tend to avoid films about the Troubles, because I don't want to know. I want to move on. I want to not have to think about it. When I was growing up, I grew up in Grimsport, which is a wee coastal village. We went to Belfast once a year to go to the pantomime. We would get the train from Bangor to Great Victoria Street. We would walk 100 yards over to the Grand Opera House, watch the pantomime, back to the station, go home. I was not allowed to go to Belfast, ever, because my dad said it was too dangerous. So I kind of avoided films about Belfast when I was growing up because of that, because I was like, there's nothing there that appeals to me.
So this is going to be a very interesting podcast series for you then, Brian. You know,
it'll be a strange one. It'll be a lot.
Where did you get your toys?
Stroked off. Yeah. Can't do that.
Where did you get your toys from then? You had to go to Leisure World?
I have no idea what that is.
Oh, I'm just feeling really old.
No, you're not old. I was just very cut off. Like, I'm from County Down.
You were in like You were in like a lighthouse in Grimsport with Robert Pattinson and William Dafoe. That's pretty much where you kind of were raised.
That's not far off. we played at the harbour a lot as kids.
I like groom sport. It's lovely. It has a lovely little beach. It's a lovely little beach. It's a lovely little swimming pool, if I remember right. Or is that Donaghadee? Am I thinking of? Is there not a swimming?
We have a paddling pool.
There we go. A paddling pool. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah.
But,
fond of your lobster there, aren't you?
Oh yeah. The more I grew up, because my dad's very into history and local history, and the more I grew up, and you had to study the Troubles at school at some point. It was a very lightweight version. Like you only got the bare basics in school because we were on the British bloody curriculum, so they didn't really want to talk about it. But the more I talked to my dad about it, a lot of people that were involved in the Troubles actually moved to Grimsport after the ceasefire. So there's a lot of people there that were directly involved, which kind of creeped me out as well. So again, I avoided it for that exact reason. So with this film, I really wasn't sure what to expect. I'd avoided trailers, and I know a lot of it seems to be like Marmite. A lot of the initial reviews I saw, people were either ranting and raving and saying it was amazing, or people were like, that was shite. But they wouldn't elaborate on why. So I was like, what am I getting here? I'm not gonna lie, I was not in a rush to go see this. I wasn't that excited. The only reason I went was because my lovely mum doesn't like going to the cinema on her own. So when me and my sister were down at the weekend, we offered to go with her. She loved it, whereas me and my sister were like, not a masterpiece, it's not bad. Me and my sister Emily both studied film, so we can appreciate it from a technical point of view, like the shot with Buddy where it's at his eye line and it's the arc shot going round with when the riot scene breaks out. There's bits where he's looking up at Jamie Dornan as if it's like the kid looking up at his dad. There's wide shots the way the actors are blocked in the scene. I think this might be the scene you were talking about, Jim, where Jamie Dornan's talking to his older son about doing some jobs for the bad people, but it's a big wide shot and you can see Buddy just come into the side of the frame. I thought that was done really well, but story-wise, like Joe, I think it was tonally, it was all over the place. I know a lot of people are comparing it to magical realism, so the realism and the sweetness of it, with incorporating all the Van Morrison music and all. I just thought it was a bit much. There was really serious bits and then there was really cheesy bits, and they didn't flow well. I don't know what it was about it. I think me and my sister kept coming back to the scene at, I think it's the end of season 1 of Derry Girls, where the girls are dancing at the assembly, and that scene is juxtaposed with, I think it was a bridge bombing, and the emotional impact that you get from those two contrasts. That was so much more powerful than this. So I think I just went in a bit, I didn't go in with many expectations, but I came out a bit disappointed.
Can I just push you, and maybe because Joey agreed with Victoria, is it maybe because, and I know exactly the sequence you're talking about in Derry Girls, and even in series 2 where there's the visit of Bill Clinton, I just want to come back to kind of stuff. Is it easier for us, maybe as, I'm going to throw myself in as this, the young'uns, right? As the young'uns, is it easier for us, and I'm not trying to be patronising it, but is it easy for us, because it's amazing when you think how far Northern Ireland has come in a relatively short space of time. I know a lot of people will rightfully say at this point, we haven't gone far enough, but that's a discussion for another day. We'll maybe leave the politics kind of angle to Slugger O'Toole, but the sense of the Derry Girls stuff, because maybe it's more recent and it resonates with us, we find it easier to have an emotional engagement with what Lisa McGee's doing with that series, as opposed to your mum, my mum. I know Amber's mum, who's someone who left Northern Ireland. She moved to London when Amber was, Amber wasn't born. It was just before Amber was born. They had moved to London. Her mum moved on her own to London, and they have found very much an emotional engagement with this film and a nostalgia to that, and that reminder that kind of, it wasn't always kind of I came back to at that point I mentioned earlier on. You didn't care if your neighbour was Protestant or Catholic. You cared about, oh shit, the rent man's coming, things like that. You cared about where you were getting your money from, or you were worried about the tax man. And I want to come back, I do want to make this point. The thing I loved about the film, and it's a small thing, I know, but it's it's positive role models. We have Jamie Dornan's da, and even Caitríona Balfe's kind of character Ma. They're both positive. They're both very much in love with each other. Jamie Dornan's character is a joiner. He's going to have to go to London. He's going to have to do work just to do what he can. It's not that he's trying to get away. Near the end of the film, it's kind of hinted. It's that sense of like he knows he wants to get away. He doesn't know how long he can keep his family here, and they might break. But I come back to that sequence, like that you were talking about, Victoria, where Jamie Dornan's character Pa is talking to his oldest son, and he's talking about, I don't want you getting involved with these guys. I don't want you doing this. You know that those aren't just because his oldest brother is delivering milk bottles. You can't hear, listeners, or you can't see the air quotes. He's delivering milk bottles for the group of basically loyalist paramilitaries, and he's like, that's not milk you're delivering, and he's like, yeah, and that's it. And for a second I was like going, right, is this demeanor of this caring father? He's very much kind of, I think anyway, he's not perfect because he didn't pay his taxes, this positive male role model for young buddy and co. I said, is he going to turn now? Is he going to kind of beat his son? Is he going to kind of go into the risk of kind of punishing him? But it's not. It's just this kind of, it's a nothing of a sequence, but it's just a sense where you go, oh, is he going to get his belt out or something like that? But no, he's just like, come here, help me with this, and the scene moves on. And look, I'm an old softy. I know that. The final sequence of this film, just before we go, and I know we're venturing into spoiler territory, but we know if you know at all Kenneth Branagh's life, we know that he's someone who left Belfast at a relatively early age. He always remained kind of very much pro Belfast and talking about Belfast and his love for the city of Belfast from throughout his career. But he left Belfast. But it's a sequence, and it's just, and I know it's so cheesy, and it's just a simple thing to say. That sequence when he gives this little girl that he loves a flower, and they have this talk about, but Dad, she's a Catholic. It's like, well, it doesn't care. I don't matter whether it's whatever religion, X, Y, Z, who you are, what you are, as long as that person treats you right, treats you with respect, that's all you want. And I know it's simple, and sometimes simple things just have to be said. I'm sorry. Maybe I've just become a big softy, and you two are all kind of just so kind of hard, cool, and kind of still kind of young and hateful. But on that point, I know I rambled off there, but do you think, Brown, Joe, I don't know why I always call Brown. Do you think Victoria or Joe, do you think it's like something like Lisa McGee's Derry Girls? For us, it's maybe easier for us to have an emotional attachment to that because it's more in our recent psyche, while older viewers like Victoria's mum, like my mum, like my mother-in-law, I don't know if your parents have seen it or not, Joe, but they have had, older viewers from here particularly seem to be having a very strong emotional response to the film. Just your thoughts on that, just because you brought up Derry Girls, Victoria.
Well, from my point of view, I did see this from my parents. My mother, she was a bit like myself. She was like, I didn't really think much of that. There's not much of a story to it and that and so on and so forth. But that's just her and her relationship with film. She likes a film with a good long story and a lot of action and stuff like that. It's just her personal taste. Whereas my dad, he
your mum likes Fast and Furious movies, is what you're saying.
You joke, but she would watch it. I'm not joking. Like last time I was at home, we watched Nobody, and she absolutely loved it. Sure, she was the one who got me into horror to begin with. That's another story for another time. But yeah, my dad, he liked half of it, and the other half, well, it's erased from his memory because he was asleep during it. But that's just him. He falls asleep during films all the time, unless it really is something that catches him. He'll latch onto it. But going back to your point on Lisa McGee's Derry Girls, I think with that there, although it is full of humour in that there, I think there's more sincerity to it, which is why I would latch on to that a lot more. And not to say that Branagh's Belfast is insincere. I think it's almost too sincere to a point because he does indulge in a lot of things a bit too much, to the point where you're like, it feels a bit more detached from reality than something maybe like Derry Girls. But again, that goes back to the point, it's a 9-year-old's perspective, and you have to try and root yourself with that thought in mind throughout it. But with Derry Girls, like, I think that closing scene in season 1 is one of the most powerful, displays of what the Troubles is like for a young person growing up, even in the late 90s or something like that, because, I wasn't really old enough to remember even the Oma bomb, and I can just remember, my memory of that actually is just seeing teletext reports on the screen, because my parents were looking for updates on it, because it was before any more major news updates. Like, as soon as the news broke, it was a telephone call to the house, and then there was constantly checking it, and that was my memory of it. And that's why, with something like Derry Girls, there was that innocence of youth contrasted with, the family watching the report of that bombing on TV, and, the two sort of patriarchs, who were always at odds to each other. They had that nice moment where they just, set all that aside, because this was a very serious moment, a serious and emotional moment. Whereas in Belfast, where you even described that moment at the end, it doesn't matter if she's Catholic or Protestant, as long as she's a good person and all that there. And you're like, it's a great message, right? And I completely understand it's the delivery of it there. I'm like, that's just very trite too saccharine. It goes back to my original complaint about the film. But see, that's the thing. That's why I sort of think something like Derry Girls has more sincerity to it, and why that works more than something with Belfast, where he has a bit of a heightened reality to things through the child's perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I was doing my research, a couple of the interviews were saying, just going back to like the cinematography and the way everything's framed, someone described it as very painterly, like as if it's done, like as if it's a painting, like it's a work of art. So you're looking at it from the outside in. I didn't identify with Buddy. I didn't really care what happened to him, quite frankly. I know that sounds horrible, because I'm not, like, the actor is phenomenal. He's so brilliant. He's so funny. The way he says his lines.
But you hated him.
I didn't hate him. I didn't really care about him. That sounds awful. But I think with something like Derry Girls, because I was born at the end of 95, so like their perspective isn't even what I remember, because I was a baby. Like I was still a teenager. I left school in 2014. So
you weren't trying to do a mad dash to get to take that concert? Well, I suppose you didn't live in Derry.
My auntie was actually there, which is kind of cool. So like that would have been my mum and dad's generation, like early 90s, just coming out of school, getting married, getting serious. So that would have been their kind of age bracket. But I think I relate to Derry Girls more, because I feel like it might just be because of the intimate setting, because you're going to school with them, you're in their house all the time, you're experiencing stuff with them. Whereas I feel like in Belfast, you're watching Buddy experience stuff. If that makes sense. I don't know how to explain it. It's just I didn't really identify or empathize with Buddy, and that's not nothing to do with the wee lad's performance. He was brilliant. I just think it's the way, like Joe said, it's very stylized. It's very heightened reality. It doesn't feel real at all. It feels like an artist's depiction of it, whereas Derry Girls is very gritty and realistic, as silly as that sounds.
Can I make one point? And it's something I noted down when I was watching the film. And I've seen this twice now, because it's not because I loved it so much this second time around. It's like I wanted to see it just because I knew it was sugary sweet. I was worried it was going to be sugary sweet, but even though it was sugary sweet, it just managed to get across the line for me. And maybe it's that sense that I don't know. I mean, I am a Kenneth Branagh fan. I know that he comes across as someone who is genuinely, he's someone who comes across as genuinely sincere and honest and forthright. I've had the fortune to interview him once for Cinderella, very, very briefly, and he was just charming and courteous, and that's all I can say, and polite and engaging. And maybe it's the sense that sentimental, and maybe coming back to that sequence, maybe it's the emotional impact of, yes, that sequence with Jamie Dornan talking to his son and talking about, I don't care, son, if that girl's a Protestant, if she's a Catholic, if she's a Hindu, whatever. I think he goes on a whole list. It's like, as long as she makes you happy and as long as she treats you right, that's all I care about. And I know that's such cookie cutter material, But it's then the sense that only minutes later we have this film that's dedicated. I think it's for those who stayed, for those who left, and for those who were lost. And yeah, I think there's sincerity there. I get what you're both saying, but I wanted to make the point, because Kenneth Branagh, he is someone who comes very much from a stage background. This is something that he has written. I think this would be a fantastic play, because it's so kind of set. I mean, there's Buddy's house, there's a couple of sequences in school. It reminded me a lot of stuff like The Dubliners with James Joyce, where you've just got that one room setting, and maybe in a play where you're not trying to open everything up, and you're not able to. I come back to points I made about musicals that were released last year. Just because you can open up your stage and within it whenever you're be able to do on film instead of what you're able to do with the limitations on a stage. I know that's becoming increasingly less and less. Now you can do much, much more with the stage. But I wonder, maybe will this film, maybe, I don't know, I could be completely talking nonsense, in the future find its home maybe on the stage, because you could see it quite easily being done on stage. I don't know. I know it's a bit of a tenuous point. I think maybe it might benefit from that kind of tonal change, the kind of use of the camera work. The camera work's stunning at times. I think at times it's almost too perfect. There's sequences where we see Jamie Dornan and we have Buddy looking up on him. He's like a giant. But then that's how a 9-year-old would look at his father and how he would look at his mum. And, I mean, there's a couple of sequences I think are great, like the rioting sequence. I mean, the rioting sequence, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just easily pleased. You know, little Buddy being told to pick up something in the middle of a riot, and he picks up some fairy from washing powder because it's because it's biological.
Yeah, it's biological. Yeah,
it's biological, and then just being trailed back by his mum right back in the middle of it to put it back. You know, I was talking to Amber's mum. Yeah, I was talking to her mum, and it's like it's very authentically Belfast at times. It's like all the little phrases, what's mine's me own, and what's mine's me own, and there's something keep saying it, and it's like there's a sequence where Buddy kind of goes, what does he keep saying? It's like, what's mine is mine, what's mine. I can't remember. Apologies, because I know
the listener screaming at you, being like, "It's this!
It's this! It's this!" It's probably someone from Belfast going, "Of course,
it's this, so it is.
It's this one, so it is, mate." But it's just like there's a sequence where Buddy kind of goes, like, "What does that even mean?" And you're like, nobody really knows. Nobody really cares. Look, I want to come. Another positive I really want to talk about. I know you mentioned earlier on the production side. Look, people have been a bit piffy about Jamie Dornan. I'll not have a bad word said about old Jamie. I think Caitríona Balfe is amazing in this film. Amazing. She's really solid in this. She was a really fantastic performance. We have Buddy, but okay, we'll talk about Judi Dench. But Ciarán Hinds, I mean, I adored Ciarán Hinds. You know, if ever there's just a film where I think of, like, it's a performance that I don't think it's an Academy Award winning performance. I don't know, but a performance for me that just makes a film that deserves to be nominated alone. There's just sequences, and even just the way kind of, it's the naturalism of the film. Like when we first meet Ciarán Hinds, he's kind of sitting on the outside toilet talking to his son outside, and it's so natural, and just how he goes on, and how natural he is with Judi Dench, how natural he is around Buddy. Ciarán Hinds for me is very much the heart and soul. We've really spoiled it, that Ciarán Hinds' character, don't get too emotionally kind of attached. He might not see it to the closing credits. He might not make it to the airplane, right? Okay, that's all we can say. He might not make it to the airplane, but there's just, and it's in the trailer, there's a wee exchange between him and Buddy, and it's talking about, the big thing they talk about is all I've ever known is Belfast. Belfast, I've known all my friends are here, all my family are here, and if we go over to England, no one's going to know us. They won't understand us because they can't understand who we are, and they'll look. I mean, there's just other things that kind of this resentment if we come and taking other people's jobs. That's more from the mum's point of view rather than Buddy's. But there's just a lovely exchange between Buddy and Ciarán Hinds. Is it Pop he's called? Because it did confuse me. There's Pa and there's Pop as the two, and I just loved. And I think maybe it's Ciarán Hinds' performance is really winning me over. I like Ciarán Hinds in this, and I guess that means we can talk about Judi Dench. I don't know where her accent was going. I don't think she knew where her accent was going, but it wasn't as... It was genuinely... I'd heard so much about this accent that she was doing. I don't think it was as horrible. I mean, I've heard worse. I have heard worse accents. Brad Pitt, come on down. That guy in Charlie's Angel 2... I can't remember the name of the actor. Is it not Louis Theroux's brother has the terrible Irish accent in Charlie's Angels 2 Full Throttle, where he shows up as a kind of an Irish kind of hitman? It's pretty terrible. He's got a connection with Uma Thurman. There's been a history of bad accents. I don't think Judi Dench's accent is in the top 10 of bad accents. I just don't know. It's not even just quite north, south, west, or east Belfast. I don't know where the buck that accent has been, but I still think she's fine. I mean, I'll watch Judi Dench read the bloody newspaper. I'll happily watch her, read the phone book. The accent is jarring. I get that, but I think it's the fact that it's this genuine sweetness she has of this someone who's, and I guess we've all had that. I know I had that with my granny. I don't know about you, that your mum's your mum, your dad's your dad, but your granny, I never had a granddad, so I can't say that, but I'm sure it's the same. My granny, when she was in the house, was just omnipresent. It's that sense that you're always aware of what she was. She picked up on everything. Not that she was a kind of a figure of kind of fear or anything in that sense, but she always was there. She's omnipresent in that sense, and I think... Kenneth Branagh, that's early on, as I said earlier on, we have Ciarán Hinds and Jamie Dornan, they're having this conversation about, I think it's the doctors or this, that and other, and just from out of the shadows, we have Judi Dench's character kind of saying, we're not deaf, It's just very natural, very authentic to Belfast. I've talked a lot, so Victoria, feel free to kind of take over, and then I suppose we should bring things to a close.
No, I didn't actually mind her accent. It wasn't... it's not the best, obviously, but our accent's hard to do. Even us three, we all sound different. You could go 20 minutes down the road and our accent's going to be different. I didn't actually think she did too bad. It didn't jar me particularly, and it's probably the same for a lot of people. She reminded me of my own granny, but I'd be curious to see what my granny thinks of this, because she's from Oxford, she's English. She married my granddad just before the trouble started and came over. Thought she was coming for a holiday and then never left. So I'd be curious to see her opinion of this, because obviously the film is about leaving Belfast, where she came to Belfast to raise a family. So I think that juxtaposition would be interesting. But yeah, I didn't think Judi Dench was too bad. She was very sassy, like you said. She was omnipresent. She was practical. I think Ciarán Hinds was a bit of a dreamer. He was very optimistic, idealistic, where she was very grounded. But I think the two balanced each other. You could tell they were so in love with each other. It felt very real. It didn't feel forced at all, which I think was lovely.
There's a sequence where they talk about when she drew on fake tights, or is it on her leg? And I genuinely, I just find it so funny.
That was
this is the thing about the film. I keep coming back to, I think, the criticism people have had, and neither of you have really made this, but this sense that it didn't address the troubles. I didn't need that. I've read that in books. I've seen films that have tried to kind of do that. I had no issue with it, but I come back to the point. Yes, there's some jarring moments, but sequences like that between Judi Dench and Ciarán Hinds when they're talking about when they were younger and when he nearly had a heart attack whenever he seen her with these fake tights, and then the fact that he couldn't get them off. He couldn't figure out that they were drew on. It's so natural. It's so funny. I properly laughed at that. There's a sequence I've already mentioned a couple of times about a rent man coming to the door, and I laughed. There's so many times, the sequence in the riot where he has to give the washing powder back, I laughed. And if this was a comedy, if this was just a straight out comedy, it would pass the laugh test for me. I get maybe I don't know, maybe we're coming in with so many expectations because of the talent involved in front of and behind the camera. the subject matter, the fact that it's so close to our hearts in many ways. I'm sure we all have our connections to the Troubles here, the three of us, and many people listen to this from Northern Ireland, even further afield. I went in with fears about what it was going to be. Even though it still presented itself as that film, I still enjoyed it. But Joe, where are you going to weigh in? I know I kind of went off on a tangent, as I do, but let's bring it back to Judi Dench's accent, because I'm sure you were a fan.
Judi Dench from Belfast. I I know you both said it, as jarring as it was, it didn't distract. It kind of did a bit too much for me. But having said that, those little more subtler moments, like whenever it's the whole idea of granny sometimes hear what they want to hear, and they let you know when they hear something that they don't want to hear. Like you said, that moment where she's like, "I'm not deaf" and stuff like that. That's naturalism. That was beautiful. And then even there's a nice wee moment where her and Ciarán Hinds' character, he starts singing her and they dance in the living room. See, the thing is, those moments, little moments like that in the film were good and they worked well, but the film as a whole and the sum of its parts didn't quite gel together, which is why I maybe don't like it as much as I did, because like you, I both agree, Ciarán Hinds is fantastic, and I think outside of Jude Hill, he's the best member of the cast, and even his scenes with Jude Hill are some of my favourite of the film. Like even when I know there's another scene actually with Judi Dench is quite funny, is when they're talking about the moon landing, because that's Buddy's project at school. He's to write about the moon landing, and she's talking about it and her understanding of it along with her grandfather. Like, that just seemed like a natural conversation now. I can even remember when I was younger just having with my grandparents about any sort of news story or something of the day. But having said that, it's some of the parts of the thing that sort of made the film a bit jarring to me. And on the issue of the exploration of the Troubles through the film, I kind of think most of those criticisms seem to be coming from an international audience, I find. Because maybe they're coming into this expecting, it's set in 1969. They're going to sort of, Branagh through the film is going to teach us about the Troubles. Whereas, like you said, that's not his intention at all. And that isn't shown through the film. So, I don't really buy that as a valid argument. What I would say is, the consequences of these actions, that his neighbours are being essentially, burned out of their homes or whatever. That's maybe the only problem I have in terms of its relationship with the Troubles. You don't see those consequences a bit enough. The neighbours are being kicked out of their homes now, but you don't get a sense of that at all. You just get a sense, everyone's fine. There was that initial riot, everyone's fine in the neighbourhood again. We have this barricade now and nothing bad will happen again. It's a bit too, protected in that sense. But again, it's coming back to my point that I've always been trying to reiterate to myself. It's a child's perspective. What would a child really see at that time? But if I was to make a quibble about, its relationship with the Troubles, it'd be that. But it's very minor. It didn't affect my overall opinion of the film in general. Like, my opinion of the film is based purely on, its tone and some of the script issues and stuff like that there, and how things didn't quite gel together for me. No, I do admire that Branagh is trying to tell a very personal story, but it just didn't work for me.
Yeah, and that's perfectly valid. You make some pretty solid points. I'll keep coming back to this point. I think the film is unfairly compared to Roma. I think that is a far superior film in many ways. There is a film that I think when you talk about kind of trying to show windows into other people's lives, Roma does that much more successfully. But then, coming back to the point we've all made throughout this, we have a slightly older protagonist in that film. I think the young girl in Roma is maybe in her early to late teens. I'm not quite certain. She's definitely young. She's definitely, I think, maybe kind of 18, kind of in around that. So maybe you have more you're able to grasp more complexities, and you have a bigger circle of friends. I guess, really where we only see Buddy's friends is those trips to school, and it's really all his focus is literally on, I want to get to the top of the class. to see the girl. If I can do a bit more, if I can do better in my maths, I can do better in my project, I can get to sit next to the girl. And I have never, ever, been able to resonate with a young boy, because that's what I was like at school. Rachel, I'm still friends with you. It's technically on Facebook, but I remember many days when I was younger, just trying to do good at homeworks and stuff, just to kind of get your attention. But those are discussions for another podcast. Look, we've talked about this for about an hour. I think I'm the most positive. I am a fan of Sir Ken. Anyway, I think I love him as a filmmaker, and people have made this point before. He's someone who, as a filmmaker for me, made Shakespeare much more accessible in that sense of someone who would never have been interested in Shakespeare. And I was always going to give this film a soft touch. I was worried about it. I think it's it's like when you hear any film being made about Belfast, it's made about the Troubles, you kind of go, oh, haven't we heard this story before? Haven't we said this? Haven't we heard everything we need to hear about the Troubles? And this is going to be something that we will be addressing throughout this podcast series as we look at other films, different explorations of both life during the Troubles here in Belfast, life kind of after the Troubles, the aftermath. There's so many films now that are being made. The Irish new wave is here and ever present. There's so many films being made right now that don't just feature Belfast, but have Belfast-based talent in front of and behind the camera. So that's what the series is all going to be about, and it's going to be interesting, particularly someone like Brian, to see what you think about this, what we kind of discuss, and where we venture with this podcast series. So look, I think we'll wrap things up. So just generally some closing thoughts from yourself, Joe, about Belfast. How do you think, I suppose this is a question we should ask for every film in this series that we do. How do you think this reflects Belfast, both to a local and international audience?
Well, in terms of how it portrays Belfast, I think it is positive. Like you can just tell from a lot of the critical reception. I think, overall, I think you could maybe say it's a 75-25 split in terms of, positive to negative. And a lot of people seem to be buying into that, and it does show. And to me, it does display Belfast in a positive way, in that we aren't, when people think about us in our past, it's not just about the Troubles. We are actual people. We had all these problems in our lives. Like you said, people cared more about the rent man or the taxes and so on and so forth. It was stuff like that mattered more in the day-to-day lives. But then obviously these extreme elements from the outside just sort of crept their way in and took a stranglehold on the whole country as things devolved into the Troubles. But in general, I think I'm fairly positive on how Belfast is represented. So in that respect, it's a thumbs up for me.
Okay, Victoria?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. Like, it was really lovely to see Belfast portrayed nicely, and like Joe said, to show that we were just people. Like, you didn't care if your neighbour was Catholic or Protestant, because you were all from the same area, you all had similar jobs. Like, the fact that you were working class is what united you. It wasn't, and your religion didn't divide you until these extremists came in and brainwashed people and intimidated people. Like, even with Jamie Dornan, like, one of the gangster thug guys says to him, either you pay or you're dead. Like, it wasn't, or join us. Like, a lot of people probably got involved with the violence out of sheer fear or to protect their families. Like, a lot of them probably didn't believe in the cause the way the thugs did, which is, I think that it didn't touch on it in too much depth, but I don't think it needed to, because like Joe said, it's a 9-year-old's point of view. Like, he's overhearing this. He's not going to understand. And people from an international audience aren't going to understand. We're from here, so we understand the complexities behind those lines. But like, I'm glad I've seen it, and I would recommend it. But if people from an international audience are going in expecting to learn about what the Troubles were, they're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, for me, I think the film is largely positive in its portrayal of Belfast. Its international appeal for me, right now we only have to look at the world, when we look at kind of the refugee crisis and kind of people fleeing their homes to look in search for a better life elsewhere. That's ever present within the narrative here. It's not a sense that you've you've kind of given up on your home. It's that sense that you think we particularly see that through through Pa and Ma in this film. And every time I think of Ma, I do think of Give My Headpiece. But when these parents thinking of like, right, okay, we don't particularly want to leave, but it's going to be for the best for our children. I think the underlying themes of that film will play well universally. I agree with both what you're saying, both Victoria and Joe, the fact that we don't get the complexities. We see it very much, but then that is from Kenneth Branagh, a Protestant working class family. It would have been nice to have seen that opened up, to see that into the Catholic working class family, to see more dynamics. But it's a film. It's a stick you can rightfully hit the film with. But I still think I enjoyed it. And maybe it's just a case of just the mood I was in when I went to see the film. As I say, I've seen it twice now. It put a smile on my face, and I always come back to is it worth the price of your cinema ticket? And yes, for me, largely, yeah, it's worth the price of our cinema ticket. And it'll be interesting to see where we go next with our Belfast on screen season with this pod. So this was what the podcast will be focused on now, Belfast Productions. But fear not, dear listener, if you still want to check out We Need to Talk About Disney, Crime Scene to Screen, Talking Cosplay, and you want to hear me ramble about loads of stuff, you can still get that. But it's going to be on our YouTube page now. So there will be more rambling, more visual rambling instead of audible rambling on the pod in the future. So check out the YouTube page, be sure to subscribe, and you might even want to throw us in some suggestions for some films you might want us to talk about as part of this Belfast on-screen season. So that's pretty much everything from me. So all that's left for me to do now is thank my two guests. So thank you very much, Joe McElroy.
Thanks very much, Jim.
And thank you very much, Victoria.
Thanks, Jim.